Well, thank you very much for having me, and let me join you in expressing condolences to the victims of the earthquake. I was in Kyoto at the time, but luckily this part of Japan was not concerned. But I think in the spirit of solidarity, the whole of Japan has to work. Solidarity, friendshoring, economic security. So this is an issue which is very much discussed. It is discussed in academic circle, it's discussed by think tanks, and of course also by governments. Now in my capacity as professor and as a distinguished professor at the Brussels School of Governance, I'm giving my academic and my personal view on these issues. But I do that with a lot of sympathy for trade policy. I have negotiated myself for about 3 years in the Uruguay round when we were setting up the WTO. And this is something which has had a big impact on me, because at the time, economic security equaled the multilateral trading system. So, but that was 30 years ago. And I think if we look nowadays on the understanding of economic security, we have gone a long way. And the question is, did we go in a better way or just in a different way? And I think this is something we should perhaps explore, and I will offer some ideas. What is, of course, the situation is that the WTO-centered multilateral order is not functioning as we had hoped it will function. And we also see a different attitude of governments which go back to industrial policy in the sense of getting more involved in markets and in trying to give the direction in which directions businesses should go. One of the big means which is used are subsidies, all kinds of subsidies, and according to competition law, whether in the WTO, but also if I look at the European Union, there are rules under which conditions you should use subsidies, and the question is, are these rules still up to date? We also experience, not least because of COVID-19, that world trade is not the engine of growth which it used to be. We also have a lot of, the wind is blowing a little bit in the other direction. Globalization is not the big word anymore. It's not the big hope anymore. And there's a lot of talking nowadays that the heydays of globalization are over, and that the new system is in the making. But we don't know exactly what the new system looks like. And whenever one order is changing and another order is coming up, that creates insecurity in the system, economically, but also politically, which we have seen. And of course, the war of aggression against Ukraine is an outstanding event. There is then the risk of protectionism. Globally, is it increasing? When we talk about strategic sovereignty, about strategic autonomy, about resilience, about autarky, how can we put that in a manner that we don't fall into the trap of protectionism? Because I always like to say there is no protection in protectionism. We also experience, and this is geopolitics, the instrumentalization or weaponization of trade and investment, but also technology, and we will come to that. And I think that all leads or can lead to the contrary of the multilateral trading system which we used to have, that we have fragmentation. And some of the policy descriptions which we apply, like de-risking, nearshoring, friendshoring, and other kinds of shoring, isn't that also an indication that we have fragmentation and less of the multilateral order? So the challenge is geoeconomics and geopolitics are back with force, and therefore we start to think in a different way compared to what I was brought up back in the 1990s. So what is in the political discourse and in the narratives nowadays, in politics and also in trade politics, is like-mindedness. Because the idea is basically, well, if you are like-minded and if your value chains, your supply chains, your sea routes, everything is controlled and managed by friends, well, there can be less risk. So is that part of de-risking? But as I said, reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, all that is an indication that we want to segment. Otherwise, we would not use these terms. In economic terms, because of geopolitics, we like to talk about alliances of democracies. When we think of autarky, then we think this is perhaps a way what we could achieve with friends. But I would say this is not a viable concept to build a whole trade policy on it, because if we cut out the trade with non-democratic countries, we are basically losing half of world trade, and is that really what we want to achieve? The weaponization has become a policy tool, not only for economic statecraft, but also for technology and also migration. We have experienced that with Belarus in Europe. So, nevertheless, we have to make sure that we don't fall back in the bad old times where the law of the jungle was the strong one and not the a rule-based international order for which we were trying to achieve. So if we build a new order, and I think we have to think in that terms, because even if we want to preserve the existing order without reform, that will not work. And we cannot have a static approach. So we need also cooperation. We need rule setting, and there are, I think, a few outstanding things which are new. Regulating data. Data has become a new lifeline of the economy. When we set up the WTO, there was hardly any talk about data. We did not regulate when we were talking about intellectual property rights, about cloud computing, and these services, because they didn't exist. So we have to fill a lacuna here. So what the European Union has done is to come up with the General Data Protection Regulation, where many have joined, including Japan. The EU is reaching out for digital partnership agreements because of the importance of data and cybersecurity. And there, the ever-growing critical infrastructure is of primordial security interest. We need new rare minerals for new emerging technologies. But there, I think we also have to be very careful that we don't change one dependency against another. We had the dependency of those who were supplying us with fossil fuels, like in Europe. We were depending, or are depending still, very much on Russia. And if we have to change now for these rare materials, then other countries are the main suppliers, and they are not necessarily all democracies. So changing one dependency against another dependency without any sound policy is not bringing us more security. We also see what we were calling in the WTO the Singapore issues. They re-enter with a new focus. The sustainable development of free trade agreements is becoming more important. We have the ILO conventions. Products made with forced labor plays a role under the heading of human rights, but it was also an important issue vis-à-vis China. We are all engaged in fighting climate change, and we need green financing. So we need a taxonomy of what is green. If we don't agree on what is green, then it can be misused for protectionist purposes, and that would be a pity because we want to make a contribution to fighting climate change. So we will have to make sure, I think, that we preserve some form of multilateralism. Getting the WTO back to work with improvements and dispute settlement, I think, is essential. Also, the rule-making function of the WTO is necessary. If you read the recent statements of the G7 trade ministers, I think they refer several times in this text that the WTO should become operational again. So we don't need only words, we also need deeds in that respect. We see plurilateral agreements. Well, they are okay as long as they are stepping stones and not permanent solutions. I always recall that the general agreement on tariffs and trade was a provisional arrangement when the International Trade Organization did not pass the US Congress, and we had a provisional agreement for more than 50 years. We also have to be careful how we use frameworks or platforms below the level of free trade agreements, because they are then not part of the control of the rules of the World Trade Organization. So that's also something which is important if we want to maintain a rule-based system. I have already mentioned the industrial policies become more active. And what are the main tools then which are applied? Well, subsidies, more anti-dumping measures, more competition law. But there the question is, how do we deal with reference markets in the globalized economy, or do we want to fragment? What are we talking about? The subsidy issue I have already mentioned. And we have more and more resort to trade defense and anti-coercion law, to economic security strategies, because we see some are not playing according to the rules. On the same time, we don't have the WTO to resort to, so therefore there's a tendency to take the law and its implementation in national hands. So therefore the European Union came up recently with a proposal. It's still a proposal which has to be discussed and then accepted by member states. What is the European Economic Security Strategy, which is in addition to the strategic compass. The strategic compass is the security doctrine of the European Union, and economic strategy would be a very important leg in this overall strategy. And there, I think it's spelled out clearly what you can also read in other strategies nowadays, that we have to face different risks. The risks to the resilience of supply chains, including energy security, the risk of physical and cyber security of critical infrastructure, the risk related to technology. And this is, I think, more and more important, because there was the famous saying years ago, it's the economy, stupid. I think nowadays we would probably say it's the technology, stupid. We have to pay attention to that. And the weaponization, to which I have already referred, which is done not only in trade matters, but also control and access to technology. So in order to, once you have identified the risks, you can take actions. And how can you identify? Well, briefly promote, you have to see from the European perspective to promote the EU's competitiveness. And there it's very much by strengthening the single market, supporting a strong and resilient economy, investing in skills, and fostering the EU's research, technology, and industrial base. This is the equivalent to foreign policy. We always say foreign policy starts at home, and that, I think, applies also to trade policy in that respect. If you have a strong single market from the European perspective, then you can have a more and better economic policy abroad. But you also have to have in mind protecting the EU's economic security. Unfortunately, not everybody is playing according to the rules, and then you have to take measures. But when you take measures, it's very important that they are proportionate and precise in order to limit any negative, unintended, and spillover effects, especially on like-minded countries. And there, if you have to apply measures against everybody, you might hit also partners which you actually don't want to hit. And I think this is something which needs attention. Economic security also needs economic diplomacy. And in the strategy, it is called partnering with as many countries as possible, making use of the traditional elements like trade agreements, partnerships. There is quite a new development. We have connectivity partnerships. We have a connectivity partnership with Japan. At the time, Prime Minister Abe flew to Brussels in order to sign that agreement. We have a digital partnership, and we have to make sure. It's like a mantra that we don't forget a rule-based economic order, and that we revive the WTO and reform the WTO. We still have to invest a lot in sustainable development. Global Gateway is the program of the European Union with a focus on infrastructure. But with all the discussion about the Global South, if we want to keep the Global South on board and not lose them, we have to have them in mind when we make reforms. So economic security starts at home, robust economic performance, the single market I mentioned, leadership in terms of technology, financial stability, the EU capital market union is important, and then you have this external dimension that you engage, and multilaterally, and that you don't turn into the isolationist venue. The economic security strategy, as any strategy, first you define your goals, you make a priority among the goals, you assign the means in order to implement them. And then you have to do that in a double way, defensive and offensive. I have already referred several times to the importance of critical infrastructure, offensive to take measures against those who want to exercise statecraft. It's basically the same as preventive diplomacy. If you are strong enough and that you can talk the message that statecraft should not be applied to you because you are strong, then you might avoid a lot of trouble. So one has to be creative and not go back to renationalizing. That's very often the first reaction. If something doesn't go well, you go back and you think everything is better if you can do it alone. We made this experience in the first weeks when COVID-19 hit us. Everybody had this reflex, but I think what we should have learned is this is not how it works. We should not replace multilateralism by bilateralism, because we get to this situation that right by might, and this is not in the interest of all of us, and especially not to the interest of smaller countries. But I repeat, there is a need for reform. There is no point in defending at all price the status quo. We need new and workable rules. We need updates for intellectual property, for investment rules. We have to think of data, cyber, e-commerce, artificial intelligence, health. All these need new rules, and if we are not able to provide them, then we will lose. In all that, friendshoring is, of course, has become a big name for some time, because at the first glance, friendshoring has a certain appeal. As I mentioned, if you deal primarily with friends, but we'll come to that, who is a friend, then you might be able to avoid some problems. It's a little bit also the idea which is applied in politics. You concentrate on democracies, or if you go back in philosophy, Immanuel Kant, internal peace, that liberal democracies do not engage in wars against each other, which is also not necessarily the case. But friendshoring, I would say, covers somehow the middle ground between decoupling and de-risking. It has elements of both. Well, decoupling, short definition as it is always used, the decoupling is the more radical approach, severing of relationships and building up new ones to reduce dependencies. And de-risking is more gradual process, mitigating risks through broadening relationships, whether on the import, export, investment, or technology side. So what is also important in the discussion that one does not apply these ideas across the board on everything. Strategic goods and technology might be outstanding. We have the dual-use goods, which are the ones between civil and military use, and we need contingency planning. We all did not regard a simple mask as a strategic good, but overnight it became a strategic good. So we would need some foresight. What are possible strategic goods in the future, which we are not aware of right now? So it's the unknown known which we should have to find. So in terms of politics, friendshoring can certainly deepen relationship with partners. In terms of economics, as an instrument of industrial policy, it is interventionist. It's in the market, and normally you do that as a government if you have detected a failure in the market. And the question then always is, what is the failure in the market? There are some obvious shortcomings of the concept, of course, because you will not find everything you need with friends. Whether goods or services, you will also have to reach out to non-friends, and you will need to cooperate with non-friends also to achieve some other goals like climate change, green transition, procurement of necessary raw materials. So from a diplomatic point of view, you will try to have good relationship with many non-friends and try to get non-friends to turn them into friends. It is also, I think, a systemic issue, because when we have a market economy which is based on competition, then the concept of friendshoring may pose some problems once in a while. Perhaps best explained with an example. When China barred Australian wine for political reasons, well, our European and Chilean winemakers stepped in and gained the market. So this is a risk. And is this politically what one wants to achieve? I think similarly was a case between Japan and Korea, when ingredients for semiconductors were exported in a more difficult way, I would say, to Korea. Efforts were made to substitute them. Then you lose a market. When China barred Taiwanese mangoes, I mean, then Japan stepped in and bought a lot of mangoes. So that's a positive example of friendshoring, but I think it explains a little bit where it goes. And then it's the big question: who are friends? Are friends forever, or can friends change? Is a friend above any suspicion? Well, we also have some examples here. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. I think everybody knows. I don't have to go into details. There was also the case of COVID-19, which the commissioner in charge of industrial policy just brought up again. If you have America First principle and crucial ingredients for producing vaccines were put under control, that's a problem for friend cooperation and friend shoring. And I think Nippon Steel wants to buy U.S. steel, made an offer, and the reaction was from the United States was very clear. Their national security concern, we have to look into it. But what is really behind, I think, all this discussion about reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring is how to deal with China. I think this chart shows nicely what has happened within 20 years. In 2020, you see blue, which was the main trading partners, and red China. And if you look at 2020, this has changed. So the problem which we have is how to maintain the level playing field. Rules and regulations have to be applied and applicable to all. And I think this is the essential element of the level playing field. If you don't apply the rules yourself, you expect others to apply, then you come up. Then there's a problem which opens the door for measures, and then we lose the possibility of further cooperation. What is also a problem is if you have a burgeoning bilateral trade deficit, not because of economic reasons, because of the factor endowment, but if you think this has been created because one partner does not play according to the rules. And I think this is also the area which the economic security strategy wants to pick up. There are studies going on, and I have looked at that a little bit, like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They has also made a study and said very clearly that many countries are considering regionalization and friendshoring, trading primarily with countries sharing same values as a way to minimizing exposure, but that creates costs, and these costs were about 4.6% of GDP. This is a lot, but also the WTO in a simulation came up with a similar figure. So I think this is something which we should also have to have in the back in the mind if we talk about policy design that has to be factored into policy making. The reshoring and friendshoring and all that is not limited just to trade. It has also a very strong technology element. Therefore, I mentioned earlier it's technology stupid. And the current friendshoring trends is a little bit skewed over technology, excluding others from the state of the art of sensitive technology and limiting it to friends and to export controls or limitations on investment, whether inbound or outbound. And the outbound element is quite a new element. So that brings the whole discussion which we had in the manufacturing sector also to the technological sector. What kind of interruptions and costs are created? Again, one has to be aware of it. And this plays technology plays an important role, especially when you look at renewables, e-mobility, and defense and space. I think this is something to have in mind, where the risk comes from and how to deal with that. Now, what was done on the European side, the European Commission came up with a recommendation on critical technology areas, an effort to narrow the field a little bit and to see what we are talking about. Well, basically, enabling and transformative nature of the technology is a criteria. Civil and military fusion is a criteria, and the risk that technology could be used in violation of human rights. This is an element of the value-based foreign policy. So these are the areas, and then you take out 4 technologies in particular: advanced semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and biotechnologies as 4 important areas to work with and to see how they can be secured. All of that somehow part of an active policy, an industrial policy, but then again, it is which tools to use. Is it the carrot approach? Is it the stick approach? How to reorganize the supply, production, and value chains. And I think we should not forget that each and every company basically has a vested interest to make sure that the supply chains are organized in a manner to allow continued production, that the inputs are there, and that the intermediate products can be imported and exported, and also the final product. So resilience and the reconstruction of chains, one has to see under which conditions one should intervene. Are these completely non-economic reasons, non-security reasons, and are these security costs then not internalized in the costs of the product? Well, I think I will skip that quickly, but just the European Chips Act is one of the areas which was chosen now to make a big push forwards. So therefore it's important. I want to mention it without going into the details. The EU has a share of 10% of the global microchip market, which means there's an interest to bring it up at least to 20%. So this is important, and you have to take quite a lot of measures on a European level, and I think this is important in order to achieve things quicker. So there is the provision of a framework within the European Union to increase the resilience and have a good and productive semiconductor ecosystem within the European Union. And an important element of it is also the training and research. There it is, of course, also necessary to have the diplomacy. As a former diplomat, it's always very close to my heart to see that one can get others on board. And I think others on board are those who have the technology. But at the same time, you have to make also through diplomacy foster that you can keep the leadership also at home, because if you are not in the top notch, then it is much more difficult to have a successful diplomacy. Working together, early warning systems, making sure that the inputs are monitored. I think these are all the issues which are important. There has to be also a strong defensive element. This is clear, and I think this is also part of diplomacy then. Infringement of intellectual property rights is important. Unauthorized disclosure of trade secrets, leakage of sensitive emerging technologies. This is all important to be done and should be done on the level of security level of the European Union. It's also important to see how you manage your investment and the export and import. But as I already said earlier, what is important is to make sure that this is done in a very specific manner, not across the board, because otherwise one risks in losing the baby together with the bathtub. Well, I think this is basically what I wanted to present. As a sort of summary, let me just say we should not forget that in this situation in where we are, where we have instability politically, where we have an international trade system which is not working as we had hoped that it would work, we have to make sure that we have as much cooperation as possible. Confrontation is a good policy if you want to get more tensions, and I think this is not what we want. And I think there is the possibility for friend cooperation, like-minded cooperation, but in trade policy, in investment policy, but also in technology possibly, it can never be organized in a way it is friends only. Because I repeat what I have said, there are so many areas where friends cannot provide, and there are contingencies which are beyond the control of politics. We have started, unfortunately, the meeting in referring to earthquake. Well, an earthquake can create a lot of disruptions. And this can happen to a friend, and this can happen to a non-friend, but it has to be part of contingency planning. Last but not least, nothing new under the sun. What Lord Palmerston was saying here in the 19th century, basically in a sophisticated way, is states have interests and not friends. Thank you for your attention.